In the heart of the lifeless Gobi Desert, Chinese spy satellites record the impossible. Giant, perfectly flat structures the size of an entire city. A pattern resembling a microchip etched onto the face of the planet. But exactly 1 week later, they disappear, without a trace, without a single piece of debris, as if they had never been there. What was it? A secret weapon? A message from extraterrestrial intelligence? Or a glitch that nearly triggered a world war? We've gathered all the facts to separate truth from fiction in the story of the ghostly megastructures of the Gobi Desert. The very phrase, short and sharp as a whip, conjures up images of endless, sun-scorched emptiness. The name given to it by the Mongols means waterless place, but this definition hardly conveys the essence of this harsh land. Spanning a gigantic area of 1.3 million square kilometers, the Gobi is the 5th largest desert in the world, a veritable sea of sand, stone, and eternity that covers southern Mongolia and northern China. The Gobi is deceptive in its simplicity. It is not a monotonous expanse of sand dunes like the Sahara. It is a mosaic of diverse landscapes, rocky plateaus called hamada, where the wind has blown away all the fine particles over thousands of years, leaving only pebbles polished to a shine, salt flats that glisten in the sun like the teeth of an ancient skull, clay plains crisscrossed by a network of cracks, and only occasionally do you see those singing dunes, whose rumbling in windy weather sounds like the moaning of the earth or the cries of lost souls. This is a realm of extremes. In summer, the air here heats up to plus 45 degrees Celsius, and the haze above the horizon distorts reality, creating mirages of vanished lakes and ghost towns. In winter, merciless Arctic winds from the Siberian plains bring temperatures down to minus 40 degrees, and the ground is covered with a thin, almost invisible layer of snow that does not melt but sublimates, evaporating directly into the icy air under the low, powerless sun. The Gobi is not just a natural phenomenon, it is a giant historical sarcophagus. For thousands of years, it was not a barrier, but a road. The threads of the Great Silk Road passed through its parched riverbeds and rare oases. Camel caravans laden with silk, spices, and precious stones slowly trudged through these wastelands, connecting the civilizations of the West and the East. The same lands were swept by avalanches of Genghis Khan's horsemen, for whom the desert was their home. Empires were born and fell here, and their traces, the ruins of fortresses, abandoned cities, and forgotten monasteries, now lie under a layer of sand several meters thick, as if waiting for their hour to come. The most famous of these ghost towns is Karakoto, the Black City, the capital of the Tangut Kingdom, destroyed by Genghis Khan's troops and swallowed by the sands for 700 years, until it was discovered by Russian explorer Pyotr Kozlov in the early 20th century. And this is just one of hundreds of known stories and thousands of undiscovered ones. It is not for nothing that the desert is called the graveyard of dinosaurs. In the 1920s, an expedition led by American naturalist Roy Chapman Andrews made discoveries here that turned paleontology upside down. They found the first dinosaur egg clutches in the history of science, complete skeletons of previously unknown species, proving that tens of millions of years ago, this place was a thriving land. The Gobi preserves the past with incredible care, preserving the bones, shells, and even skin impressions of ancient reptiles, Time seems to have stood still here, turning the desert into an archive of the planet, where every grain of sand is a page in the book of history. But what if the Gobi's most grandiose secrets are not hidden underground, but on its surface? What if they are so huge that the human eye, standing on the ground, is simply unable to grasp their scale and see the system within them? In the 21st century, humanity has acquired a new, all-seeing eye, a group of satellites that continuously scan every inch of the planet from the cold emptiness of space. And then, one day, this impartial eye, flying over the lifeless expanses of the Gobi, recorded something that did not fit into any geological or historical framework. Something artificial, gigantic, with perfect geometry. Something that appeared out of nowhere, existed for only a week, and then disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a digital trace on servers and one main disturbing question. What does the great and terrible Gobi Desert really hide in its embrace? Humanity has always sought to view the world from above. First, it was mountain peaks, then hot air balloons and airplanes. But it was only in the second half of the 20th century that we gained a truly divine vantage point, rising beyond the atmosphere. This technological revolution did not begin with peaceful research, but in the silence of offices and secret laboratories during the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union, competing for supremacy, launched the first spies into orbit. These were devices such as the American Corona program, which photographed enemy territory on film and then dropped capsules containing the film back to Earth, where they were picked up in mid-air by special aircraft. This was the beginning of the era of the all-seeing eye. Today, technology has come incredibly far. Film has been replaced by digital matrices and capsules by broadband data transmission channels. Modern spy satellites, such as the Keyhole series, have a resolution of less than 10 centimeters. This means that from a height of hundreds of kilometers, they can not only distinguish a car, but also read the headlines of a newspaper lying on its seat. Every square meter of the planet, not hidden deep underwater or underground, can be studied in detail. But seeing is not just looking in the optical range. There are satellites equipped with synthetic aperture radars, or SAR. They send radio waves to the surface and analyze their reflection, creating a three-dimensional map of the terrain. Such radars are not hindered by clouds or darkness. They are capable of seeing through tree canopies and even penetrating several meters into dry soil or sand, detecting hidden objects, voids, or changes in rock density. Every second, a continuous stream of data pours onto the Earth. Thousands of satellites, both government and private, create a digital copy of our planet. This huge amount of info is analyzed by neural networks looking for anomalies and changes. For scientists, especially archaeologists, this has been a real revelation. Technology created for espionage has turned out to be the key to the secrets of the past. It has been used to find lost cities in the Amazon jungle and ancient settlements in the Arabian desert. Satellite images allow us to see what is invisible from the ground. The barely discernible outlines of ancient roads, building foundations, and irrigation systems hidden under layers of soil and vegetation. This is a real revolution in the study of history. But this eye in the sky is a two-faced Janus. For some, it is a tool for knowledge. For others, it is a means of total control and a new generation of warfare, where information about the location and movements of the enemy determines the outcome of a battle before it even begins. It was this impartial, all-seeing eye, capable of looking beyond the clouds and deep into the centuries, that was once directed at the silent expanses of the Gobi. It was looking for something familiar, but stumbled upon something completely incomprehensible, causing analysts around the world to ask themselves, what was it? It happened on a Tuesday in the middle of spring. In the Flight Control and Data Analysis Center somewhere near Beijing, the atmosphere was routine, almost sleepy. Dozens of analysts in identical blue uniforms sat silently in front of rows of monitors. There was no room for emotion here, only focused work. Their task was to methodically review and catalog data coming in from the Yaogan satellite constellation, a multi-purpose system officially intended for scientific experiments and crop assessment. Unofficially, however, according to Western experts, it was one of the world's most advanced species reconnaissance systems, the watchful eye of the Chinese Communist Party, monitoring every corner of the planet. On this day, there was no sign of anything sensational. On one of the monitors, in the sector responsible for monitoring the Northern Territories, a small red flag flashed. This was a standard procedure for the automatic system, which flagged any significant changes on the surface compared to previous images. A young analyst, let's call him Zhang, lazily moved the cursor to the flag. Most often, these were traces of a sandstorm that had changed the relief of the dunes, or seasonal drying of the salt marsh. Routine. He enlarged the image, expecting to see the usual picture. But what appeared on the screen made him freeze. On a perfectly flat, rocky plateau in the heart of the Gobi Desert, in a sector considered completely lifeless and geologically stable, giant structures had appeared. It wasn't a blurry spot or a play of light and shadow. The image was crystal clear. Artificial, perfectly straight lines formed a complex geometric pattern that resembled both a microchip and the blueprint of some futuristic city. Zhang rubbed his eyes. He switched to data from another satellite, taken a few minutes earlier from a different angle. The structures were still there. This was not a compression artifact or a matrix failure of a single device. They were real. With trembling fingers, he called up archive images of this square from the past month, the past year, the past 10 years. Emptiness. A perfectly clean plateau, untouched for decades. These megastructures had appeared in just a few days. He assigned the event a preliminary identifier, anomaly 074. Then, breaking protocol, he rose from his seat and strode quickly toward the shift supervisor. Silence fell in the room, and all eyes turned to them. The chief, a gray-haired veteran of the space program, approached Zhang's monitor. He stared at the screen for a long time, silently, his face growing stony. Then he gave a few short, quiet commands. Access to the sector was immediately blocked to ordinary analysts. The information was classified as top secret. A few minutes later, people in strict civilian suits, the kind who never introduced themselves, appeared in the room. News of the discovery spread like wildfire through closed communication channels, reaching the highest levels of military and political leadership. The air in the control center, which had been sleepy just a moment ago, was now buzzing with tension. What was it? A secret American facility built at an unimaginable speed? An unknown natural phenomenon? Or something so alien and incredible that there were no words to describe it? The answer had to be found, and found immediately. The initial analysis of anomaly 074 shocked the experts. The first thing that caught the eye was the scale. These were not just large objects, they were colossal. The largest structure was an almost perfect rectangle. Its dimensions, according to preliminary estimates, were about 1 kilometer wide and almost 2 kilometers long. To visualize this, imagine 30 football fields laid out in a row. This structure was visible from space with the naked eye. Inside this giant rectangle was a complex network of straight lines, intersecting at precisely calculated angles. They formed a pattern strangely reminiscent of the circuit board of a giant computer or processor. The lines were perfectly straight, without the slightest bend or defect, which completely ruled out their natural origin. Some of them were thick and massive, others were thin as hairs, but together they created a single, coherent composition. Analysis of the reflected light showed that the material of the lines had a slight metallic sheen. They reflected the sun's rays differently than the surrounding rocky desert. This was not just a drawing in the sand. These were physical, three-dimensional objects. Not far from the main rectangle was another, equally strange formation. It looked like several concentric rings inscribed into each other with mathematical precision. The outer ring was 500 meters in diameter. At the very center of this ring structure was something that looked like three separate objects, resembling wingless airplanes, spaced at equal distances from each other. Their purpose was completely unclear. The third complex of objects, located several kilometers to the east, consisted of thousands of small squares arranged in a perfect grid, resembling a target or calibration template. The area of this grid was several square kilometers. What was it? A giant antenna? An energy plant? Or a landing pad for something that did not use the runways we were familiar with? Thermal scanners did not show any significant heat emissions. The objects had the same temperature as the surrounding desert, as if they were part of it. However, data from SAR radars showed that the structures had a slight but distinct height, ranging from several tens of centimeters to 1.5 meters. They weren't drawn, they were built. They rose above the surface. Most importantly, analyzing the shadows cast by the objects at different times of the day allowed us to create a rough 3D model. It was real. In the control center in Beijing, analysts saw a picture unlike anything in history. A whole complex of megastructures had appeared out of nowhere in one of the most inhospitable places on the planet. It was the geometry of the impossible. It did not resemble a city or a fortress. There were no roads, walls, or residential buildings. It was something else, technological, functional. But its function was beyond human understanding. It was a challenge thrown in the face of Earth's technology. For the next week, the control center near Beijing operated under a secret state of martial law. Sleep and rest became a luxury. All available satellites for visual and radar reconnaissance were redirected to Square 074. The object was studied continuously, 24 hours a day. Images were taken in the optical, infrared, and ultraviolet ranges. Radars scanned the surface, trying to determine the structure and composition of the material. Spectrometers analyzed the reflected light. But the mystery only deepened. The structures remained completely inert. They did not emit any energy. They did not produce heat. They did not respond to radio signals. They simply were silent, gigantic, and incomprehensible, like prehistoric monuments. Each new photograph, taken a few hours apart, only confirmed their unshakable presence. The leadership in Beijing demanded answers, but the scientists and military had none. The only thing that landed on the table were reports full of hypotheses, each more fantastic than the last. Day after day passed. The tension grew. Was it a provocation? A secret weapon? A joke of nature? Or was it contact for which humanity was completely unprepared? Every hour of silence from the structures increased the anxiety and confusion. The 8th day arrived. Exactly 1 week had passed since the first discovery. At the control center, they waited for the next batch of images from the Yaogan 33 satellite, which had the highest resolution. It was a routine check, but everyone's eyes were glued to the main screen. A timer appeared on the monitor, counting down the seconds until the data packet was received. 3, 2, 1, 0. The image covering the entire screen flickered for a second as it refreshed. In the ensuing silence, someone swallowed nervously. The screen showed nothing. In place of the giant rectangle, the complex network of lines and concentric rings, there was once again a bare, untouched, rocky plateau. Exactly the same as it had been in all the images taken before that fateful Tuesday. The structures had disappeared. The first reaction was disbelief. "System failure!" someone shouted. The shift supervisor ordered an immediate check of the satellite telemetry. All systems were operating normally. The camera was fine. The data transmission channel was clear. Data was requested from other devices that had flown over the area within a few minutes. The response was the same. Nothing. The anomaly had evaporated. It disappeared as suddenly and inexplicably as it had appeared. Panic, bordering on hysteria, broke out. Analysts feverishly compared new and old images. They looked for any traces. Dents in the ground, debris, scorched earth. Anything that would indicate that a giant complex had been here. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The desert surface looked as if it had never been touched. As if these megastructures had never existed. As if it were a mass malfunction, a collective hallucination. But they were there. They remained in the form of terabytes of digital data in the center's archives. Clear, irrefutable evidence. A digital ghost that flashed across radars and camera lenses and dissolved into nothingness. The mystery had reached a new, unimaginable level. It's one thing to build something huge in secret. It's quite another to make it disappear without a trace overnight. This was beyond the limits of known technology. It was a week that seemed never to have happened. Faced with a technological mystery that could not be explained, analysts in Beijing turned to history. If modern technology couldn't provide an answer, perhaps the key lay in the past? After all, the Gobi Desert is not just a wasteland, but a sarcophagus of civilizations. The archives were combed for any information about lost cities, fortresses, and monasteries that had ever existed in these territories. The name that came up most often was Karakoto, the legendary Black City that became the Atlantis of Asia. It was founded in the 11th century as an important center of the Tangut state of Xixia. Located at the crossroads of trade routes, Karakoto flourished. It was a rich, multi-ethnic city surrounded by powerful fortress walls. Not only Tanguts lived within its walls, but also Chinese, Tibetans, and Mongols. Archaeological finds testify to a developed culture. Books in several languages, elegant household items, works of art, and the world's first paper money were found here. But prosperity was short-lived. At the beginning of the 13th century, Genghis Khan rose to power in Asia. his invincible army approached the walls of Karakoto. According to legend, the city resisted for a long time, and the enraged Khan ordered it to be destroyed to the ground. The Mongols blocked the Edzingol River, which supplied the city with water. Left without water, the defenders and residents were doomed. The last ruler of the city, Karajanjun, hid the treasures in a well, killed his family, and launched a desperate final attack. The city fell, the victors destroyed it, and the desert began its slow advance. The sands of the Gobi swallowed the walls and towers, and for 7 centuries, the Black City became a legend, a ghost town that only old men told stories about around the campfires. It was not until the beginning of the 20th century, in 1908, that an expedition led by Russian geographer and traveler Pyotr Kuzmich Kozlov, following ancient maps and rumors, discovered the ruins of Karakot, buried under the dunes. Kozlov's findings were sensational. He brought back an entire library of thousands of manuscripts from the ghost town, including a unique Tangut Chinese dictionary that made it possible to decipher the dead Tangut language. The world rediscovered an entire civilization. The history of Karakoto is a vivid example of how the Gobi can keep secrets. Could Object 074 be another such lost city? A giant complex of an unknown ancient civilization, temporarily exposed by the winds? This version was quickly dismissed. First, the geometry of the structures was too perfect, too machine-like for ancient buildings. Second, the speed of disappearance. Karakoto was swallowed by the sands over centuries. Here, everything disappeared overnight, leaving no trace. Nevertheless, the story of the dead city gave pause for thought. What if something much more ancient and technologically advanced lies hidden beneath the sands of the Gobi? What if the legends of ghost cities are just a distorted echo of the memory of something far more grandiose? In the world of intelligence and analysis, there is a principle known as Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Rejecting mystical and extraterrestrial hypotheses, experts turn to the most obvious and frightening version: the military secret theory. What if Anomaly 074 was not a legacy of the past or a visit from outer space, but a top-secret testing ground for the Chinese People's Liberation Army, hidden in the heart of the country? Deserts have always been the perfect place for secret military games. The American Area 51 in Nevada and the Soviet, now Russian, Kapustin Yar test site have long been synonymous with secret tests and cutting-edge technology. For China, the Gobi is a giant, virtually uninhabited backyard. It is huge, isolated, with predictable weather and minimal witnesses. It is the perfect place to hide from the prying eyes of spy satellites, anything that is not meant to be seen by outsiders. What exactly could they be testing there? One of the leading hypotheses is calibration targets for new generation guidance systems. Giant patterns, perfectly visible from space, could serve as targets for testing the accuracy of ballistic and cruise missiles. This version is supported by facts. In other desert areas of China, for example, in the Taklamakan Desert, satellites have repeatedly recorded full-scale models of American aircraft carriers and destroyers. These were targets. Another assumption is that they were testing stealth technology and electronic warfare systems. The structures could have been imitating an enemy airbase, radar station, or command center, while Chinese stealth aircraft, such as the J-20 fighter jet, were learning to detect them. But what about the unexplained disappearance? This also has a place in military logic. The objects could have been modular, made of lightweight composite materials, or even inflatable. They could be quickly assembled and just as quickly dismantled and removed. This could have been a test not only of weapons, but also of the speed of the engineering troops. Build a fake military facility, mislead enemy satellite reconnaissance, and then remove it overnight without leaving any traces. A perfect disinformation operation. Perhaps the Chinese military detected increased interest in this square from foreign satellites and immediately shut down the operation to keep it secret. This explains both the speed of its disappearance and the complete absence of traces on the surface. This theory seems the most coherent and plausible. It is logical, based on known precedents, and explains both the appearance and disappearance of the giant objects. But even it leaves questions unanswered. Why did the structures have such strange, computer-generated geometry, unlike typical military targets? And why did official Beijing remain silent, not even trying to pass it off as something harmless, such as scientific research? The mystery remained. While the internet and enthusiast forums were abuzz with speculation about aliens and military bases, Western intelligence think tanks came up with another, much more prosaic, but no less impressive theory. It was a version about a giant web stretched across the desert to catch the eyes of strangers. We are talking about calibration grids for spy satellites. Any complex optical device, whether a microscope or a telescope, needs to be calibrated. And a camera on a satellite capable of distinguishing objects the size of a soccer ball from a height of 400 kilometers is perhaps the most complex optical device ever created. For such a system to work correctly, it needs to be calibrated periodically. It is necessary to ensure that the optics are in focus, that the software interprets sizes and distances correctly, and that there are no geometric distortions at the edges of the frame. To do this, special reference objects, called calibration targets, are created on Earth. These are huge patterns with pre-known sizes, shapes, and reflectivity painted on the surface. The satellite photographs them, and then the onboard computer compares the image with the reference and makes the necessary adjustments. From this point of view, Anomaly 074 ceases to be a mystery and becomes a model of the highest engineering art. The giant rectangular structure, resembling a microchip, is an ideal target for checking resolution. The varying thickness and distance between the lines allow the limits of the optics to be determined. The grid of thousands of squares is a classic template for correcting geometric distortions, known as distortion. The concentric rings could have been used to adjust not only optical, but also radar systems, as well as to focus laser altimeters. The location is ideal. The Gobi is a flat, uniform surface with minimal precipitation and almost constant clear weather. It is the perfect backdrop for the contrasting lines of the target to be seen as clearly as possible. This explanation is the most logical and widely accepted among space experts. Similar, albeit much smaller, calibration targets are used by NASA in the Mojave Desert and by other space agencies around the world. China, which is actively developing its space program, and the Yaogan group of reconnaissance satellites had to create something similar. And given Beijing's ambitions, it is not surprising that their test chart turned out to be the largest and most complex in the world. But what about the mysterious disappearance? There is a logical explanation for this. It was probably a temporary calibration for a new generation of satellites launched into orbit. Once the fleet of sky spies was tuned and debugged, there was no longer any need for the targets. They could simply be dismantled and removed. If they were made of rolls of special light-reflecting material, it would not have been difficult for an entire army unit to remove them without leaving a trace on the rocky ground. The operation was complete, and the web was dismantled. Thus, a fascinating mystery turns into a story of technological competition and espionage in the 21st century. Less romantic than Lost Cities, but much more relevant and disturbing. Despite the apparent coherence of military and calibration theories, there is another voice that must be heard in any investigation. It is the voice of the skeptic, asking the most uncomfortable but also the most important question. Can we trust the data itself? What if the giant structures in the Gobi Desert never existed? What if it wasn't a ghost of flesh and metal, but a digital phantom born in the silicon bowels of the satellite itself, or in the labyrinth of program code on Earth? In the world of digital images, nothing is completely reliable. Anyone who has ever seen compression artifacts in a low-resolution photo knows that data can be distorted. And when it comes to terabytes of information transmitted from space, the likelihood of error increases. The first hypothesis of skeptics is sensor artifacts. A satellite camera is a giant matrix consisting of millions of light-sensitive pixels. Sometimes some of these pixels fail, becoming dead or hot. Could a systematic error in a whole group of pixels, superimposed on the uniform surface of the desert, create the illusion of a geometric pattern? Theoretically, yes, but in practice, this is unlikely. Images from different satellites with different matrices confirmed the presence of the object. The second version is a software error. Before reaching the analyst's screen, raw data from the satellite undergoes multi-stage processing. Algorithms remove noise, correct colors, and stitch several frames into one large panorama. Could a complex algorithm designed to recognize images have failed? Could it have thought and amplified random patterns on the surface, mistaking them for something meaningful and creating a giant pareidolia, a visual illusion? This is more plausible. History knows of cases when neural networks trained to search for, say, faces began to see them in clouds, on the surface of Mars, or in patterns on toast. Perhaps the artificial intelligence of Chinese satellites turned out to be too smart. And the third, most common cause of errors is data transmission failures. The signal from the satellite to Earth travels through hundreds of kilometers of the atmosphere and outer space, where it is exposed to solar radiation and cosmic rays. A single high-energy proton hitting a memory cell can change a bit, from 0 to 1, causing an error. Could a series of such glitches distort the original image file beyond recognition? But this theory is also refuted by the main counterargument: data consistency. The 074 anomaly was seen by several different devices, at different times and from different angles. For all of them to produce the same complex error would require an incredible, almost impossible coincidence. And most importantly, how can the disappearance be explained? If it was a pixel failure or a program glitch, it would most likely have been permanent. But the error could not have corrected itself exactly 1 week later on all satellites simultaneously. The voice of skeptics is important, but in this case, it does not provide an answer. The digital ghost turned out to be too real. What if the answer to the mystery has been right there all along? In the most literal sense of the word. What if, blinded by the complexity of anomaly 074, we were looking for an intelligent creator where only a blind but powerful force had been at work? This version forces us to look at the desert not as a passive backdrop, but as an active creator. Geology is the art of nature, and sometimes its creations can be so strange and large-scale that they seem artificial. Consider the famous Nazca lines in Peru. Although created by humans, they show how easy it is to create giant patterns visible only from above on a desert plateau by simply removing the top layer of dark stones and exposing the light-colored soil beneath. Nature is capable of something similar, but on a much larger scale. One such phenomenon is salt flats. These are dried-up salt lakes, where evaporating water leaves behind a crust of salt. As it dries, this crust cracks, forming patterns. Most often, these are polygons, known as salt polygons. Sometimes, under certain conditions, these patterns can be surprisingly regular and cover huge areas, creating the illusion of a giant mosaic or tile from above. Another natural sculptor is the wind. In deserts, it creates amazing landforms called yardangs. These are elongated, parallel rocky ridges separated by corridors. From a bird's-eye view, a field of yardangs can resemble a giant barcode. Could the anomaly be the result of a unique combination of these factors? For example, seasonal flooding of a huge lowland area, followed by rapid evaporation, creating a complex salt pattern. And then, a strong sandstorm completely covered it. This would explain both its appearance and disappearance. The structures were not built and dismantled. They were formed and destroyed by nature itself. No technology, no mysticism, just physics, chemistry, and meteorology on a grand scale. However, this beautiful theory has a weak point. Even the most complex creation of nature bears the mark of chaos and fractality. Lines are never perfectly straight, angles are never absolutely precise, and patterns are never symmetrical down to the micron. And the 074 anomaly was just like that. Its geometry was too perfect, too machine-like. It did not resemble cracks or traces of erosion. It looked like a drawing made with a ruler and a compass the size of a city. Nature is a great artist, but it paints in an impressionist style with broad, free strokes. What the Chinese satellites saw was a hyper-precise, calibrated engineer's drawing. And this discrepancy forces us to once again reject the geological version as incomplete. When logic is powerless and the facts stubbornly remain silent, the human imagination rushes to the only place where there are no limits: space. Inevitably, the most daring and controversial of all hypotheses arose in the discussion of anomaly 074, the theory of an extraterrestrial visit. What if the creators of these giant structures were not humans? What if, for one short week, the Gobi Desert became a place of contact, witnessed, ironically, only by the impartial lens of a spy satellite? The idea seems fantastic, but its supporters point to a number of arguments that they believe are compelling. First, the nature of the objects themselves, their computer-generated geometry, their scale, their absolute alienness to everything humans build. It didn't look like a city, a testing ground, or a station. Second, and most importantly, the way they appeared and disappeared. The structures weren't built, they materialized. They were not dismantled, they dematerialized. Silently, instantly, and without leaving the slightest trace. No known Earth technology is capable of such a thing. It is more like the work of some kind of field, camouflage, or even teleportation technology. The objects were turned on for a week and then turned off. This behavior is not that of builders, but of operators. For ufologists and paleocontact enthusiasts, Anomaly 074 became almost perfect proof. It fit perfectly into their worldview. Silent, mysterious aliens leaving mysterious signs on Earth that only they themselves could understand. The giant pattern in the Gobi was immediately placed on a par with the Nazca lines, crop circles, and other mysterious geoglyphs that are commonly believed to be traces of extraterrestrial activity. It was the missing piece in the global mosaic of the secret presence. However, despite its appeal, this theory has no material evidence to support it. No radio signals were recorded. No exotic materials were found. There were no witnesses in the sky above the area. This is a classic argument from ignorance. We don't know what it was, therefore it was aliens. This assumption is based on the absence of other explanations, not on the presence of real evidence. It is a leap of faith, not a scientific conclusion. And yet, this hypothesis lives and thrives because it satisfies a deep human need for wonder. It turns a dry geopolitical mystery into an exciting cosmic opera. It tells us that we are not alone in the universe. Thus, the cosmic footprint in the Gobi Desert remains a footprint in our imagination. It is a modern myth born of 21st century technology. Powerful, exciting, but so far unrelated to proven reality. If it is not ancient civilizations or aliens, or even a satellite malfunction, then there is only one thing left: the incredible, yet still earthly genius of humankind. And when it comes to cutting-edge and classified technologies, our gaze inevitably turns to China. In recent decades, China has demonstrated remarkable success in scientific and technological development. Its space program is both awe-inspiring and frightening, while its military developments, often shrouded in secrecy, give rise to numerous rumors and speculations. What if Anomaly 074 is part of some kind of Project X, a large-scale and top-secret government project aimed at creating technologies that surpass everything currently known to mankind? Perhaps it was not just a calibration test site, but a test of a prototype of a new, previously unseen weapon. For example, an electromagnetic cannon capable of creating directed pulses, or a landscape modification system. Some experts have suggested that it could have been a device for camouflage or holographic projection. Such technologies, although they seem fantastic, are being actively developed in laboratories around the world to create invisible objects or deceptive targets. What if the giant structures were not physical objects, but only a hyper-realistic holographic projection created to test enemy satellite reconnaissance systems? The disappearance would then be easily explained. The projector was turned off. This would explain the absence of traces on the ground and the apparent instantaneousness of the disappearance. Such a projection could be so convincing that even the most advanced satellite systems would not be able to distinguish it from a real object. Another bold hypothesis suggests the use of technologies based on metamaterials. These are artificially created materials with unusual electromagnetic properties that allow, for example, light to be controlled, making objects invisible. Theoretically, if a giant object were created from such materials, it could be made visible to satellites by changing its properties and then invisible again. This would explain both its appearance and its disappearance without a trace. However, the problem with this theory is that all these technologies, electromagnetic cannons, city-sized holograms, metamaterials capable of masking megastructures, are either in the theoretical development stage or at the laboratory experiment level. Transporting them to the Gobi Desert on such a scale and in such a way that they remain completely undetected until they are activated is a task that seems virtually impossible today, even for countries such as China. Nevertheless, this version fuels the fears of Western intelligence agencies, which are constantly trying to figure out what other technological surprises China has in store. After all, the invisible war for technological superiority is constantly raging, and the Gobi Desert could become one of its unspoken battlefields. In the 21st century, no secret known to more than one person can remain secret for long, especially if that secret exists in the form of a digital file. And although Beijing did everything it could to hide Anomaly 074, they forgot one thing. Their satellites weren't the only ones watching the Gobi. American, European, and possibly Russian reconnaissance aircraft were also scanning the region. Most likely, some of them also noticed the strange structures. And somewhere in this complex chain of data transmission, there was a leak. Unofficial, unauthorized, but inevitable. The story did not begin in the news agencies, but in the darkest and dustiest corners of the internet. On little-known forums dedicated to conspiracy theories and ufology, an anonymous user posted several compressed, low-quality, but still discernible images. The caption was short. "Look what they found in China. They're hiding it." The initial reaction was disbelief, but the images were too strange to be a simple fake. Enthusiasts began their own investigation. That's when the myth began to take on a life of its own. Using publicly available mapping services such as Google Earth, internet detectives began combing the Gobi Desert in search of the elusive square. They did not find the original anomaly, as it had already disappeared, but they found dozens of other strange objects: calibration grids, military training grounds, weather stations, even just unusual geological formations. All of this was compiled into a single file and presented as a single giant conspiracy in the Gobi. Then the snowball effect kicked in. The story migrated from forums to blogs, and from there to YouTube. Dozens of videos with sensational titles appeared, in which experts with intelligent expressions analyzed blurry screenshots and drew far-reaching conclusions. Each new storyteller added something of their own. Some recalled ancient legends about flying machines in the region. Others brought up secret Nazi bases that were supposedly evacuated to China after the war. The imagination knew no bounds. Fake testimonies appeared from alleged former employees of the Chinese space program, who confirmed the extraterrestrial version. Fake documents with top-secret stamps were created, describing non-existent details. The original, real fact, the brief appearance and disappearance of mysterious structures, was drowned in a sea of fiction. The myth became much more interesting and larger than reality. It grew its own ecosystem of websites, video channels, and social media communities. Thus, a top-secret military intelligence observation turned into a global folklore phenomenon. This is a perfect example of how modern myths are born in the information age. They start with a grain of truth and then grow to incredible proportions, fueled by collective imagination and a thirst for wonder. Sooner or later, Every great mystery has its deep source, an anonymous witness who supposedly knows the truth. The Anomalies 074 Internet investigation was no exception. When the wave of rumors reached its peak, a long post appeared on one of the forums. The author, hiding behind a meaningless string of letters and numbers, introduced himself as a former junior data analyst from the center who first discovered the structures. His story was written in a disjointed, emotional manner, as if in one breath. It was perfect fuel for the conspiracy fire. He claimed that the official reports were lies, that the anomaly was not just a passive object. According to him, instruments recorded strange, low-frequency vibrations emanating from the center of the complex. Not sound, but vibrations that allegedly made people's teeth shake. The witness described panic among senior staff. He spoke of locked doors, people in plain clothes confiscating all records, and strict orders to forget everything they had seen, under threat of being charged with treason. The most striking detail of his story was his description of the moment of disappearance. He claimed that it was not just a refresh of the image. A few seconds before, he said, all the monitors showing the object were illuminated by a blinding white flash. Then, emptiness. And not just emptiness, but absolute emptiness. He wrote that the radars showed not just a flat surface at that location, but a kind of negative anomaly, as if the space in that place had become thinner. This story, of course, could not be verified. It did not contain a single name or any specific technical details that could be confirmed or refuted. It was pure emotion, the perfect urban legend. But that's exactly why it went viral. It was translated into dozens of languages, quoted in blogs, and read aloud with dramatic pauses on YouTube. It gave the soulless satellite images a human dimension, fear, mystery, a sense of involvement in something big. Soon, other eyewitnesses appeared. A Mongolian shepherd who saw strange lights in the sky that week. A civil aviation pilot whose compass allegedly went haywire when flying over the area. All these stories were, as a rule, anonymous and unverifiable. This is a classic mechanism for creating a myth. Eyewitness accounts, even fictional ones, create the illusion of authenticity. They appeal not to reason, but to faith. And in the story of Anomaly, they worked perfectly, turning it from a mystery into a real thriller. To understand the uniqueness of an event, it must be compared with others. Anomaly 074 in the Gobi Desert, for all its uniqueness, did not arise in a vacuum. Our planet is dotted with giant signs left by both nature and humans, visible only from above. The most famous example is, of course, the geoglyphs of the Nazca Plateau in Peru. These are huge, stylized images of animals, birds, and geometric figures created by the Nazca civilization between the 5th century BC and the 5th century AD. Their purpose is still a matter of debate, ranging from ritual paths to an astronomical calendar. But despite their outward similarities, their gigantic size and visibility from above, the difference between them and the Gobi is enormous. The Nazca lines are art, organic, and fluid, even if geometric. The structures in the Gobi are engineering, rigid, mechanical, devoid of any artistic merit. There are also modern analogs, which are much more prosaic. In the deserts of the southwestern United States, for example, in the area around Edwards Air Force Base, there are numerous calibration targets for reconnaissance aircraft and satellites scattered across the landscape. These are giant triangles, grids, and scales drawn on the ground. Here, the similarity is much greater. Their purpose is most likely the same, to calibrate complex optics. But again, the main difference is in scale and complexity. The American targets are functional and simple. The structures in the Gobi were an order of magnitude larger and incomparably more complex. The Internet age has given rise to a new type of archaeology: couch archaeology. Armed with Google Earth, thousands of enthusiasts around the world are searching for similar anomalies, and they are finding dozens of them. Strange circles in Egypt, mysterious lines in the Kazakh steppes, incomprehensible patterns at the bottom of dried-up lakes in Australia. Almost always, there is a prosaic explanation for these findings. They can be traces of old irrigation systems, the outlines of former Cold War missile bases, seismic profiles left behind during oil exploration, or simply unusual geological formations. But comparing all these objects with Anomaly 074 only emphasizes its uniqueness. None of them combined all four key elements: a gigantic, almost kilometer-long scale, perfect, computer-generated geometry, sudden appearance, and, most importantly, complete and traceless disappearance overnight. Other anomalies either exist for centuries or, being man-made, leave traces of their activity behind. The Chinese anomaly, however, behaves like a ghost. It breaks all known rules. The study of analogs has not clarified the situation, but only confused it further. It has shown that we are not dealing with just another strange object, but with a phenomenon of a completely new class, for which we have neither a name nor an explanation. It is a mirror in which all our knowledge is reflected, and we see only emptiness. In any mystery, especially one involving state secrets, there is one factor that is more powerful than any evidence or refutation. That factor is silence. The official, deathly, impenetrable silence of the authorities. And in the case of Anomaly 074, Beijing played this card flawlessly. Since the alleged data leak and the start of the Internet storm, there has been no official comment, no confirmation, no denial. The Chinese Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the China National Space Administration, all have behaved as if no anomaly ever existed. Journalists, both Chinese and foreign, tried to get some kind of answer. At regular briefings, they were asked direct questions about the strange structures in the Gobi. The answer was always the same: "We have no information on this matter," or "Next question, please." This silence is a powerful catalyst for conspiracy theories. In an information vacuum, the human imagination begins to work overtime. The absence of an official version is perceived not as a lack of information, but as proof that the authorities have something to hide. And hide something very important. After all, if these were just calibration targets or meteorological installations, what would prevent them from simply saying so? That would have cleared up all questions and made the conspiracy theorists look ridiculous. But Beijing remained silent. And this silence gave rise to a logical chain in the minds of observers. If they don't deny it, then it must be true. And if they don't even confirm the most innocuous version, then the reality must be even more incredible than the wildest guesses. Perhaps that was the goal. In modern information warfare, silence can be a weapon. By allowing rumors to spread, Beijing could sow uncertainty and fear among its geopolitical opponents. Let them guess what superweapon or technology China possesses. This strategy of strategic uncertainty is often used in military doctrine. Don't show your true capabilities, just hint at them, forcing your enemy to spend resources on reconnaissance and analysis, as well as overestimating your power. On the other hand, silence can be a sign of confusion. What if the Chinese leadership itself did not understand what it was? What if they encountered something that did not fit into their worldview and simply paused to save face? To publicly admit that something huge and incomprehensible is appearing and disappearing over your territory with impunity is a demonstration of weakness. It is easier to pretend that nothing has happened and conduct an internal investigation behind closed doors. Either way, Beijing's silence has turned a technical mystery into a political thriller. It has become the main proof for everyone, from ufologists to military analysts. Everyone saw in this silence confirmation of their own theory. The story of Anomaly 074 is a perfect textbook on survival in the information age. It reflects all our modern fears, hopes, and delusions like a drop of water. It is not just a mystery, it is a mirror in which our society looks at itself. At its core lies the classic formula for creating a modern myth. Take a grain of irrefutable but incomprehensible fact, in this case, real satellite images. This fact is placed in an environment where information spreads instantly, the internet. Then the main ingredient is added, the human need for mystery, for wonder, for the world to be more complex and interesting than it seems. This mixture explodes, giving rise to dozens of versions, from scientific to outright fantastical. The irony is that the technology that was supposed to make the world completely transparent and understandable, the all-seeing eye of satellites, has become the source of one of the most confusing mysteries. The tool of objective reality has given rise to a subjective myth. In this story, the boundaries have been blurred. To the average person, China's secret military test site looks no less mysterious and alien than an alien landing pad. When facts are lacking, any theory that stirs the imagination has a right to exist. And here, the most important art of the 21st century comes to the fore: the art of distinguishing truth from fiction. Critical thinking, the ability not to take things at face value, but to ask questions. Who is the source of the information? What are their motives? What exactly do we see in the picture? And what are we imagining? Where do the facts, the images, end and interpretation, calibration, aliens, begin? The ability to see this boundary is the key to solving not only this mystery, but any other. Anomaly 074 is not so much a story about the Gobi Desert as it is a story about what happens in our minds when we encounter the unknown. We fill the void with our own projections, fears, and hopes. The task of the researcher, and the task of each of us, is not to succumb to the temptation to choose the most beautiful or the most frightening version. The task is to learn to live with uncertainty, to recognize that sometimes the only honest answer is, I don't know. For it is precisely in this I don't know that the true space for knowledge lies, not in ready-made answers, but in correctly asked questions. The mystery of Chinese megastructures is not a test where you have to guess the right answer. It is a training ground for our critical thinking. So, what do we have left? Where has this investigation, which has taken us through historical archives, secret military bases, scientific laboratories, and the darkest corners of the internet, led us? We return to where we started, to an empty, rocky plateau in the heart of the Gobi. We are faced with a scattering of theories, each of which is logical in its own way, and incomplete in its own way. The most rational and plausible explanation is a combination of military and calibration theories. Yes, most likely, these were giant targets for calibrating a new generation of Chinese spy satellites. This version explains everything: the location, the artificial geometry, and even their disappearance without a trace. They were simply dismantled and removed after the mission was completed. It's a boring, prosaic, but most likely answer. However, it does not explain Beijing's silence. It does not explain the incredible complexity and scale of structures that seem excessive even for the most ambitious calibration tasks. And it leaves a slight feeling of dissatisfaction. All other versions, from geological anomalies to visits by aliens, are either contradicted by facts, the geometry is too perfect to be natural, or by the lack of facts, there is no evidence of extraterrestrial contact. They remain in the realm of belief and imagination. The truth most likely lies somewhere in the middle, in the gray area between known technologies and state secrets. Perhaps it was not just a calibration test site, but a test of something fundamentally new that China is not yet ready to show the world. Camouflage, holographic projection, or rapid deployment technologies could all have been part of complex exercises, where Anomaly 074 was just one element of a grand spectacle staged for the all-seeing eyes in space. But while the official archives remain closed, any version remains mere speculation. And that is the main conclusion of this story. The Gobi Desert has kept its secret. It showed us something incredible, and then, like a magician, hid it back in its sandy sleeve. Thus, Anomaly 074 has turned from a real event into a modern myth, into a legend about ghost towns that appear and disappear in the digital haze of the 21st century. It is a reminder that even in our age of total transparency and satellite surveillance, there are still blank spots on the world map. And somewhere out there, under a silent sky and indifferent sands, the answer waits for its moment. Perhaps we will never know it. Or maybe one day, a new satellite flying over this square will once again see something that will leave the world speechless with amazement. The mystery remains in the sands,